never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Welcome back to my Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Our guest today is an amazing man. He is a man who has worked in the entertainment industry for a long, long time, decades. And therefore, he is a man who's used to herding cats, herding big type A personality cats who might as well purr or rather like to eviscerate you. It's not necessarily the nicest environment to work in, and maybe no surprise that in that environment, the man had a lot of help from friends such as Jim Beam and Johnny Walker, and as all his friends and relatives that came along for the party. So today I want to know how our guest has turned around from the man who was rather floating along on all those waves of addiction and mental health challenges to now become the man who is in control, who is no longer the cork on the surface of the ocean, but rather the master of the ship who's sailing through the winds, and he decides where he wants to go. So I'm so glad to talk today to Joe Tlustos. Joe, welcome to my show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Wow. And I mean, how the hell did you get into the entertainment industry? To start off with that. I mean, that is the dream of so many young people. Come on, you lived the dream.
I didn't plan it for a minute. I did my first radio show when I was 17 years old in Wabasha, Minnesota, on the shores of the Mississippi River. And I was a senior in high school, and I would drive down to from the small town I lived in, and I started there and was worked there for about a year, and then thought, well, that was great. That was fun. Now it's time to go into the real world and get a real job. And I've only said that about 6 times, that it's time to go to the real world and get a real job, before I suddenly occurred to me that I actually had a career here, and which ended up being 35 years long.
So what did you do? So, I mean, it's one thing to do sort of high school radio, then to actually get into the positions, get into something that actually pays. How did you go about that?
Every single one happened just by accident, not by plan, certainly. You know, there are destination people in the world, and there are journey people. Destination people have goals and stuff, you know, whatever those are. Me, a journey guy all the way. And it was on the journey that opportunities presented themselves. And part of it was networking and knowing people, and some people along the line believing in you and seeing something maybe in you that you didn't see in yourself, who decided to give it a chance. And before I knew, I've left the business. I left the business on my own 5 times, and always was lured back because of somebody had an idea, and I said, well, that sounds interesting. So let's give that a try. And it worked out. It worked out.
Which is cool. But the question, of course, is why did you want to leave? What was the negative? So you were a radio producer. What came then?
Yeah, I did just about everything in the radio business, from on-air talent to producing to programming an entire station to discovering talent and coaching talent, finding people who were not traditional media people, but who were smart, successful in what they did. I would help them find their authentic self. And why did I stop? I actually, in this business, at least in this country, your odds of getting fired are extremely good. And I made it all the way to age 55 before I got caught up in politics. I was running a public radio network, the public radio network for the state of South Dakota in the U.S. And we had 11 station network, covered 77,000 square miles in 2 time zones. And but it was also part of state government, which was really a weird fit. And So I always approach the industry like, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it. Let's try things. Let's experiment. Let's do things that are different and see what sticks. And especially in the non-commercial world, if you're not going to have a laboratory there, where are you? And so we had a little difference of opinion at times. And I didn't get any calls from the governor in the middle of the night, but it came pretty close a couple times.
Ooh. Oh, it is what it is, isn't it? It is.
Well, it's like why play it safe? I always try to do it responsibly.
Yeah.
But why play it safe? Why do things that have been done over and over and over again?
See, that's the problem, isn't it? It is, and as a doctor, for example, if I work in an institution, in a hospital, there are, of course, I have to sign a contract. In the contract, there's inevitably a contract clause that says that under no circumstances am I allowed to speak badly in public about this institution. So there you are. If you are now trying to actually be inventive, being out of the box, being out of not normal, whatever normal is, inevitably it's harsh. This is, some of your comedians are renowned to be a bit acidic and a bit very, very interesting. I've recently rediscovered the German satire, which is dripping in venom and can be so dark, dark humor towards the government, very outspoken, very critical. My goodness, if you had put anything like that onto your show as a radio host, they would have stopped you there and then. Men in black suits would jump out of helicopters to get you out of your thing. So where do you draw the line? I mean, that is so hard. I mean, that is a question that you were balancing the knife edge.
Well, yeah, I guess my approach was an old school approach in that with great freedom comes great responsibility.
Love it.
I believe that.
Yeah.
And so the reasons that I got into that industry really didn't change over time. And among them were, yes, it had entertainment quality, but it also had information. And I'm old school enough to think that actually, there are such things as facts and, and doing your best to tell the truth and things of that nature. And that, which is not terribly in fashion right now, especially in this country. But I always felt that responsibility and to be there for, if it was a community or, whatever that community is, a community can be quite large, to be there when people needed help and to try to improve the condition rather than try to strip everything out of the condition that you can to bring up the largest number of dollar signs. And that's not exactly the priority for a whole bunch of people, at least here today. So in many ways, it's, life's not a line, it's a circle. And, and I was just traditional enough to go in and out of style at least a couple times. And, but I never really changed. My reason for being there was to, challenge people. Don't assume, don't talk to the lowest common denominator, push things. But do it in a relatable way and do it in an authentic, real, honest way. And it's like a lot of things in the addiction world, honesty, authenticity, and things not only fit into that world, frankly, I think they fit everywhere and in the way that we think. So, whether that's fashionable or not, I don't know. The places I was at were very successful and very successful financially, doing things the way that we did it. But also it was, and I'll try not to carry on too long here because I can't do that, is that I worked for family businesses, and some of them are quite large. In fact, to the point of putting rockets and satellites in space. But I always had that, and that was before, in our country, Wall Street got involved. When people saw a way to rules were changed on who could own what. And there was buying frenzies. I could go all day into that, but really the way that it was done and the reason for doing it changed, and it changed right at the time when the internet was coming on, which all the zanies were in the radio business, but when the internet came, all the zanies went from radio to the internet. And it was a really weird time. And the fact that I survived for 15, for another 20 years, it's kind of amazing, I guess. But it's kind of an approach. It's kind of a philosophy. It's kind of who I am. And, and again, for somebody who didn't plan on doing it and didn't necessarily need to do it, there's a lot of freedom in that. And so Anna was working for people who let me do things my way, which is very rare, very rare.
But what I saw here in the last 5-10 minutes was the real Joe, the man who sees challenges, opportunities, who goes out there. You are a man who is willing to take risks and who is going out there. You're a go-getter. And there is this drive there. And that drive doesn't take any prisoners. Is an educated guess from me, because I'm the same dude. I'm the same man.
and a lot of times, again, I think there's so many parallels between, I was going to say between real life and addictions, but it's all real life.
Exactly.
And it's part of the key is to be honest and to become okay with yourself.
Yeah. But
it's often when we're
no, Joe, that is the man that you are now. I'm interested in a man who was basically taking on these challenges, the maybe a little bit insecure 17-year-old who was trying out his spreading his wings and thinking, oh, I'm a radio star. Oh yeah, this would have been the 80s. This was a different life. There were different rules. There were different determinators of success. And certainly in the world in which I was, alcohol was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. Drugs, not so much. And always the entertainment industry has been renowned to be full of drugs. I'm not sure about the radio business. Were drugs there? It was certainly a high pressure environment. You need to be on air in a cool and calm voice, regardless what just happened. So how did that go?
Well, it is kind of complicated. My addictions were kind of all of the above, and including alcohol, certainly. Maybe one of my bigger ones, and it actually has an interesting story, but was opiates, was pain medication.
Interesting.
And, you were right, is that you couldn't go into a studio and perform well if you were intoxicated at that time. For me, it was all about self-doubt, anxiety. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert. And so people say, how could you do 5,000 radio shows and be an introvert? And I said, well, yeah, you imagine how much I had to get myself jacked up every day just to go in there.
Oh, nice.
And
I love it.
when I was unsure about myself, as time went on and I got to know myself better, and I got to the point where I'm going, I can either be a nervous wreck every day, or I can be me and let the chips fall where they may. Once I was able to do that in my profession, it's when things got fun, and it's when things really started to work. My problem is it took me another 10 plus years to do that with my life, and, out of the studio, and just one of those things where, a lot of the concepts that we talk about when we talk about addiction and things like that are not hard concepts to understand. It's that they never crossed my mind. They just were not on, you could be educated, worldly, well-traveled, street smart, all these things. And then there are other things that just you completely missed and you just had wrong. You were going on assumptions big picture assumptions that didn't turn out to be true. For instance, it took me to into my late 40s before I understood the concept that there are some things you have control over and some things you don't, which is not hard to understand. It's a very simple concept, but it never showed up on my radar.
Same here.
So you know,
Guilty as
so
charged.
in my world, everything was my responsibility.
Exactly.
Every problem was mine to solve. I cared about my guys, cared about my family, cared about all these things. And it's like, ooh, that's a huge responsibility. And sometimes you're patted on the back for being a problem solver. And sometimes you get a little cocky and think that, well, maybe I can think my way through anything. And that's where I was wrong, because I couldn't. But it didn't stop me from trying. And instead of, I kind of sometimes describe it this way. Instead of altering the machine, I decided instead to use higher octane gasoline. That was going to be my answer. If I just had a little more oomph,
oh yes,
then I could get this stuff done.
Sure.
And you look at it and you go, how did I miss that? And it's like, okay, that happens. That's part of it. How we perceive the world, how we grew up, what we thought we were expected to do.
Exactly.
Which we could misread. There's all kinds of pitfalls along the way. I'm just glad I finally got there, at one point.
See, for me, I ended up in a situation where I was beaten up by a gang, and this was a very powerless and helpless and scary scenario. And it created the most beautiful PTSD that I then reframed as good situational awareness. So there was some trauma that really set me up to be focused on always being in control, which made me very good in my job, but also gave me that knight in shining armor complex. I had to be there for everyone. I had to be there. I had to be the hero. I wanted to rescue the damsels in distress everywhere because that made me feel good. So external validation was something that became so important in me. And it was weird. If hindsight, when I say that, when I say these words, when I tell this story, does that ring a bell with you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Let's see. How could I explain this? Well, number one, you mentioned trauma. Trauma is serious business. And especially when it happens to people when they're young, especially when it happens to people, the trauma is caused by people who you thought you could trust and everything else. Super duper complicated things. And, the world I live in now is I'm a peer addiction coach, which which we can talk about later, but part of my job, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, I'm just a schmo who has lived the life that I've lived, learned the things that I've learned, and hopefully I'm a decent communicator and cheerleader and can help people maybe see themselves in the way that they don't. Part of my job too is to understand when I'm in a situation where the best I can do for a person is to steer them towards someone who has the training, who has, things that do. So it's not like I'm going to come in and save every person and save the world. But if I can refer someone to someone, or at least, I have an appreciation, having lived with mental illness most of my life, I don't necessarily always know how it works, but I know how it affected me. And I know a lot of the signs, and I know people who are very good at helping that. I mean, I've had people in my life who have helped me with that. So it's kind of it's kind of a combination of things that goes into there. And there's many ways to get in and there's many ways to get out, but to Yeah. If when I see trauma, and I see it every day, it is extremely tough, damaging, serious stuff. And it's not something that, we both have probably run into people that said, don't worry, I got it under control. I've got it figured out. And
Yeah, right.
yeah. And it's like, no, it's kind of one of those things. And I had to do this too. And in my run through addiction was I tried to fix it myself for a long, long time. And finally, one day, November 17th, Monday morning, 2008, I finally said, I can't do this myself. I've tried everything in the world I can think of, and I can't. And that's when I went to seek help.
What was the catalyst? What was the straw that broke the camel's back?
Well, I was one of these high functioning guys. I never missed a day of work. I always answered the bell. I always looked pretty cool on the outside. Inside, I was corroding. And it was, I woke up that day and it wasn't that different from a lot of days, but I had a breakfast that day of 2 OxyContin and 4 beers. And I just said, what am I doing? What am I doing here? I can't do this anymore.
Out of interest, may I ask you that on that morning, go 10 years earlier or 5 years earlier. What did the opiates do to you? What effect did they have?
Well, it was very interesting because it changed over time.
Wow.
At the beginning, I'd always gone through life and it was like, it's like my brain was always like about 1/8 of a turn off, and I didn't really understand that, but it was just like I was never quite comfortable. And that was some of the mental illness talking. And so without really thinking about it, I had started self-medicating and I had tried all kinds of things, anything I could get my hands on with the hopes that it might help. Turns out I wasn't a very good chemist, not from a lack of trying, but I wasn't very good at it. I got hurt doing a radio stunt when I was 23. And it involved donkeys. It involved me not listening to the little voice in my head. And it was a charity event to raise money for a wrestling club. And we played basketball on donkeys, which is as stupid as it sounds. And
it could have been worse. I thought you're now saying I had to wrestle a donkey.
The man's got to draw the line somewhere. But I went flying through the air and I landed. I learned a lot of things that night. One of which is that while the diamond may be the hardest substance on the planet, the tile over concrete multi-purpose cafeteria floor is a close second. And I hurt my back, and which ended up being something that I live with today. And actually had major surgery two years ago. But I went to the ER and that's where I got my first Demerol shot. And it was like that 1/8 of a turn in my head just went bing. And it's like, where you been all my life? And so for 3 weeks, a month, it was the greatest thing in the world. And for the next 20 years, it was trying to find an answer and not getting there, and more of my attention sometimes going to where am I going to keep this supply coming from? Because you know what? Because I wasn't a junkie, right? I was an upstanding, fully employed, successful, professional husband, father, all these other things. At the beginning, what it tended to do is it tended to calm me. It tended to take that anxiety and settle it down. After a while, it just made me cranky. And it also made, and I look back and it was like 9 years before I realized that back in the day, my emotions could turn on a dime and I could go from being pleasant to cranky as heck.
Oh, yeah.
And whoever happened to be in front of me was a target of convenience. And a lot of times it was my wife, and it was nothing that she did. It was, it's the drugs and alcohol talking. And where alcohol came in is anybody who's been involved in opiates knows that alcohol is the, like what we call here, the hamburger helper of things. That if your supply is getting low, it stretches things out, which is of course dangerous and all those things. But it's a large part of my life when I was in that place was it seemed like a good idea at the time. I was never trying to be a bad boy or irresponsible. In fact, I was just trying to do the opposite. But my judgment and my thought process and everything could be way off. And it was, and that's kind of I don't know if it's a mystery. There are parts that are mystery and parts that you figure out. But it was the entire time you look back and you go, how did I miss that? How did I get that one wrong? But it's and part of it is I grew up in a small farming community in Minnesota, and it was a lovely place to grow up. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the land. In fact, there are parts of it when my wife watches a lot of Acorn television, and right now she's watching a mystery series based in New Zealand, and other than you have mountains and we don't, at least where I was, the green, the marvelous things there. It was a beautiful place to grow up. But I measure time in a little different way than most people. I measure time, a lot of times it's measured in BC and AD. BC and AD. Mm-hmm. I measure time in BC and AC, which is before cable and after cable television. Because you could grow up in a small town and be very wise about some things and absolutely unaware of things. Nobody talked about mental illness. Nobody talked about alcoholism. Nobody talked about addictions. Nobody talked about those things. And, and all the stigma and stuff that goes along with it, it never occurred to me that it was, if somebody on the outside looking in would go, what in the hell are you doing? And from the inside looking out, it's like, I'm doing the best I can. Exactly. I'm doing what I think is the right thing to do. And of course it was the absolute wrong thing to do.
But I always say we are like chimpanzees who are in front of a keyboard and you sort of press the buttons a few times, playing around, and then say, ooh, that feels good. What was that? Ooh, opiates. Ooh, memory. Good. Opiates. Good. Okay. So that's us. And that's unfortunately, we do that often enough at a very impressionable age. Some of us even started in the single digits. Some of us, that was never me, but anything less than 25 years of age, your brain is still malleable. And especially when it comes to addictions, when it comes to the influences of, well, you call it the supercharged fuel that we put in us. Let that be alcohol, let that be any kind of other either behaviors that give us that high or that distraction from trauma, the distraction from our pain, the escape from our reality, either the behaviors or the drugs. And the drugs are just super. And some of us are just better than others in that. Some of us have got a bit of a genetic makeup, which gives us so much more dopamine per ounce of super fuel that we put in. And when you experience that, bang, life is good. And I loved it how you said it. There were 3-4 weeks, which were the absolute honeymoon period between you and the opiates. And it was the same with me. There was a honeymoon period with alcohol that lasted maybe a little bit longer. Maybe I would say 5 years or so, maybe 3 years, something like that. When I was in control, I thought, and that the advantages of the alcohol by far outweighed the disadvantages, because suddenly I changed towards give me 2 free drinks and I was outgoing, whilst probably I'm like you, more, I'm quite happy to be alone. I'm quite happy to be just myself. Thank you very much. No, it is weird.
Yeah, it really is. and the people I work with every day who are coming in and looking for help, it's they stretch the gamut from being in very tough shape to having substances, especially alcohol, and it's by far the most common in that we do. But it serves as a great pause button, and like on a tape machine, you can be having all these things upside down in your life, and that at a point you can make it stop for a while, and to hit the pause button. And it's very good at that. It works very well. It works really quickly. And unfortunately, of course, it only pauses things because everything is still there. The things that aren't going right are still there when you wake up the next day. And if it's a tough enough day, then all of a sudden right back to the pause button. And I kind of look at it. I look at things a little differently maybe than some people do. Is that, people will come to see me as a peer addiction coach looking for help. And they come in because they're having a substance issue, and it's usually alcohol. And I say, okay, that was a great reason to come in. But quite often, people are using alcohol and other drugs as a sort of treatment for something else. And I call that the why. Why do you do what you do? Why do you feel the need to pause? Why? What goes on here? So what I will do as a coach, and maybe I'm a little different than some, is to go, let's dig into the why a little bit. Why do you go? What is it? What's going on? And a lot of times, if we start to make progress on the why, a lot of the substance stuff kind of starts to take care of itself. And again, there's a million people come in, and they all have their own story, and they're all a combination of things, and there is no one single way that this works. But sometimes it's things like, I was going to say simple things, but communication is not simple. People tend not to be good communicators. They say opposites attract, right? In relationships, they sure do, and that can be wonderful, and it can be a real problem, because people communicate differently. Some people don't communicate much at all. And there's just, there's 100 reasons and things that go on that if we can find our way and learn a few things, change the way we think about things, stop our inclination to, everybody comes in with their own situation, but I have found some commonalities. Maybe this will be interesting. Most of the people coming to see me are smart. Lack of intellectual capacity is not the issue. In fact, often they're too smart. We also tend to be people who like to go fast.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's thinking fast, sometimes it's physically fast, sometimes it's both. Why? Because we're smart. We can. Why? Sometimes it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's not, and gets us into trouble. And we never learned along the way that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it requires us to learn a set of skills that we are not born with. If we were cars, and a new car will have a window sticker that lists all the options that are included in this particular vehicle. Well, if that were us, nowhere in there would it have things like patience and taking our time, and thinking before we leap, and having a plan, slowing down. That's nowhere. And it's not something that comes naturally. And it involves just changing the way that we think, not only about the substance and what it's doing, but really change the way we think about everything. And a lot of it is slowing down, being honest with yourself and with others. And maybe the toughest thing of all, but the most important thing for me was becoming okay with who I am, warts and all. I'm an imperfect human being, and that's okay, because so is everybody else. And am I working to get to improve? Sure. But there was such long stretches in life where every day I went, if so-and-so really knew what went on in my head every day, they would turn around and run away screaming, and so I better not let them in, because I will absolutely freak them out. And so there were a lot of ways to cover that up. There were a lot of ways to get through situations like that, take away that anxiety and that fear and depression and I was diagnosed with bipolar II, which explained a lot after many, many, many years. But once I became okay with who I am and I understood that, what, some people are going to get me and some people aren't. I know I have a good heart. I know I try to do the right thing. I care about people. I want to help. But I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it. It's like in the United States, we have baseball, the game of baseball, and baseball is a great exercise in failure. If because we talk about batting average, if you're a Major League Baseball player and you fail in your job 7 out of 10 times, you're a millionaire. If you somehow are able to go from only failing 6 times out of 10, you're a legend. You're a Hall of Famer. You are people that to talk about for generations. I'm not trying to be perfect, because perfect doesn't exist. All I'm trying to do is raise my batting average a few points. That's what I'm shooting for. And that's what I try to encourage other people to shoot for. Perfection is a wonderful concept, but it's a concept. And it's not in practice. We'll never get there, and that's okay.
Very wise points. Very wise points. Maybe
I had to screw up a lot. To learn that stuff.
Oh shit, yeah. And please come on. We both are preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
The two of us. Having said that, today I really needed to hear that, because these are all perishable insights, perishable skills, it seems to be. And then there are times when there are new challenges and when your brain wants to fall back into the old rut, into the old way of thinking that could be the victim position. Oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, another one. So that could be that. At the moment, things are not going right in my life. And I found myself going back from thriver to survivor. Now, the survivor has got some advantages. It's the ice cold dude who quite happily drinks out of the skull of enemies if he has to. And there is, and I don't let him out often. I don't find he is very productive in the long run, but he helps me to survive. And it's quite okay, because there will be challenges that you can't do anything about. You mentioned that. There will be times when you have to be a different man, and that's okay. Just be aware of it, that things are changing, and that you're now just changing the gears a bit in your life. And there are
that's
challenges.
That's where the slowing down comes in. I truly, and that's, I guess I grabbed that because that concept makes sense to me, is that when my mind is going too fast, and it can go really, really fast, I start making mistakes. I fancy myself a multitasker. You've heard the term a multitasker. Yeah, I thought I could do 3 things at once, no problem. I was wrong. I learned over time that I am not a multitasker. I am someone who can do 3 things at once and do them all half-assed. And
correct. Beautiful.
Yes. and where all of a sudden my mistake ratio goes way up, and it's like, so now I got to go back, and I got to fix those mistakes, and that took an extra time, so we got to go twice as fast to catch up. And then it's like, I started making mistakes again. Blah blah blah. That is kind of the default thinking that went on. That's much different than learning to slow down,
Oh yeah.
take your time, take a step back, read your situation, be prepared, make
And
your
it-
choices with care. But it's unnatural. This is a skill set that a person has to learn. But when you start doing that, it can be the start of all kinds of things. It gives you a chance to slow down, take time. Your method of communicating with people who communicate different than you can improve. It's like, why are we in such a hurry? Society has given us some of that. Technology has given us the ability to do a lot of that.
Sure.
It doesn't, but again, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should.
On the contrary.
So it's a process.
And there's also it's a choice. And I think often enough we find ourselves in situations where we have no control over. But here you have a control. You have the choice, the privilege of choice of either using a substance or a behavior that maybe is good for the second, but not so good for even the minute or the hour or the week, leave alone the rest of your life.
Self-awareness.
Exactly.
That's where I look at is self, and it's a little thing, but it's everything.
Absolutely.
If you are aware, then you can make better choices.
And these various positions from victim to survivor to thriver, you have got that, but you then also have a matrix which goes up from I actually live right now, I live calm, and then I live in stress and I live in distress. So you've got that moment, those directions and those directions. When you actually live with that awareness, what is going on, you know that you're cycling through these kind of various variations. And you find yourself maybe in distress as a victim. And, well, you think, oh, for fuck's sake, that was me 20 years ago. Why am I there again? And, again, you're asking the wrong question. Why me? Why me? Well, guess what? The universe will give you all the reasons why you deserve to be such an idiot. And maybe, again, that is there where the intentional living comes in, and the intentional right here, right now. Actually observe the questions that you ask, observe the answers that you get, and then think, well, is that really the best version of myself? Are these the best questions that, or are these questions that actually shackle me into that distressed victim personality? Or are there questions that actually can calm me down, maybe first from distress to stress to maybe, okay, I'm still a victim, but now I'm back in control. And that already moved you towards the survivor. And now you can actually think, okay, hang on. So, okay, what's really going on? 2 steps back. Do I see the situation actually correct? Or is my mind playing a horror video for me?
Oh, yeah. Good one. Good one.
I know our minds are so good. And unfortunately, mine comes up with,
all kinds of goofy stuff.
Is it not? We are
yeah.
So, and just that living intentionally, that is something that you really need to practice. And you can't practice that alone because no one tells you, and no one can guide you. If you're alone, you don't get the guidance to look at something that is not in your head at that moment. I think that's where a coach comes in. That's where a mentor comes in, however you call that person.
Right. I always say, taking a smart person and putting them in isolation and experiencing boredom is trouble waiting to happen. And, there's a lot of cute rhymey sayings in the recovery world. But there's one of them I really like. And that is, and I think I heard you say this too I listened to one of your episodes or watched one of your episodes. And that is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Correct.
And if you think about it, it's all about connection. And when we get into trouble, it's often because we aren't connecting and many times we've chosen not to connect for one reason or another. And it's all about connection. It's all about finding those places, and that's why, again, I tend to look at it in a real holistic way, in that the thinking that can get us into trouble with alcohol and other substances is also the thinking that can just get us into trouble in general. And if we change the way that we think, if we change the way that we approach the day, the one day at a time, the day, how do we approach the day? How do we approach conflict? How do we approach feeling sorry for ourselves, thinking that, we are, or, those worthless feelings and things like that. If we can change the way that we think about those things, change the way that we understand how we interact. And men, for crying out loud, it's what symbols, what examples are set up for us and how we're supposed to act. Number one, don't whine and cry about stuff. Keep it to yourself. Be the strong, silent type. If you broke something, fix it. Don't ask for help. Don't ask for directions. These are all, and for God's sake, don't talk about things like feelings, because it's a sign of weakness. That's the model that we get. At least we get it here in the U.S. That's the model, and it's all goofy. It's all goofy. It's just the opposite. We are, there's billions of people on the planet, sometimes for a really good reason, and that is that we don't have to be alone. We don't have to tackle everything ourselves.
It's true.
And there's just, and there's so many things that sprout out of that. But it's a matter of change. Well, I'm sorry, I get to be a broken record, but it's changing the way that you see and think about just about every part of your life. And you don't always get it, and you don't always, and sometimes we're better at it than others. But that's okay too, because part of what we see when we slow down is that we're not perfect, but we also can't be perfect. And what we're looking to do is improve our batting average, trying to do better.
I think that's so beautifully said. It is hard because it takes an intentional element to it, and therefore you take ownership of your life, regardless what is happening, how it is happening, by actually accepting the life as it is and you as you are. And that draws a line in the sand, that gives you a baseline from which to work. If you're constantly trying to escape your reality, you actually don't know who you are. So for a long time, for at least a year or 2 years after I stopped drinking, I was pretty much an empty shell. I didn't know who I was. I was literally a facade. And with hindsight, it was positive. The way I looked at it is I've got an empty canvas. I can start painting a new painting.
Exactly.
Which was an opportunity. But then again, without role models, without looking at others and comparing, I didn't know who I was. And that was beautiful, actually. That was scary, very scary to start off with. But then later on, I developed now into that person who is sitting here. There is still so much wrong with me. I'm still as fucked up in the head, in the sense of I've got so far to go, but I see that again as a positive thing. I have got so much more to develop into. So it is a matter of how do you look at the challenges, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful because the sheer fact that you recognize the privilege of choice, you also then recognize the ability that you can take action. And once you start getting into the swing of things by taking small actions, but all more or less into the right direction, more or less into the direction of the person who you want to become, that will change you. that when suddenly when the miracles start appearing, when you start feeling, oh, I did that. And often enough, you don't even know it. But if you then start journaling, maybe writing things down, keeping a track record. Some wise man once said, if a life is worthwhile living, it's worthwhile recording. So maybe actually write things down and celebrate the little wins. And suddenly you realize, wow, I actually did moderate to vigorous exercise 5 out of 7 days the last week, and I feel good.
That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A previous guest said her title was Depression Hates Moving Objects, or Depression Hates Movement.
Very true.
So,
Very
exactly.
true.
So and I experienced that this week. I'm in the Survivor, and I'm working out and I'm doing things, and suddenly I feel good. I feel, ooh. And it's like the chimpanzee pressing a new button. I think, I want to play. But this is at least a new, a good way of doing it. And it is basically the choice and taking action. These two things, that is in your power. You can't do anything about Russia invading Ukraine. You can't do anything about the divisive leadership in the United States. You can't do anything about the big problems of hunger or shortage of water. But you can take little things. You can start with yourself and become turn from a victim towards a role model of someone who gets their shit together and is wearing his or her scars with pride. And that's exactly who you are, Joe. You have gone through life and there was a lot of darkness in your life. And now you have become a beacon of light. Now you actually cherish the light. You know what the light is because you've seen the darkness. And that is so powerful. That is so powerful. That
absolutely.
is where you are a man who can help others. And that is what we need. If we can create power teams where we are the dumbest people in the team, that you're surrounding yourself not with losers, but with people who are just a little bit further down the way. May that be in finances, may that be in your relationships, may that be in your career, whatever it is. May that be just as a human being. Well, how cool would that be? And it is because these are people. These are not books. You could buy a book in every single of these things, and I did. And I read them. That's a new thing. I actually read the books because most of the self-help books just stay on the shelf. I read them, but typically with a glass of Chardonnay. And then, did I actually take action? No, I did not.
No.
So,
but they look beautiful up on the shelf.
Oh, true.
Colors, wonderful. Yeah, it's all there.
You're so right. You're so right. But if you actually get in touch with someone like Joe, then you hold yourself accountable. Then there is an interaction. And then there is, I'm sure Joe has got a few cards up his sleeves that you couldn't see coming.
Well, yeah. Beautiful. And it's, you know, what gives me hope. And there were a lot of times when I didn't really consider a person who held a lot of hope for myself or for the rest of the world. You know, we always have so much to learn about the, you know, what goes on upstairs, what goes on when chemicals are in our body and when maybe our brain chemistry isn't exactly where it's supposed to be. There's so much that we don't know, but we've learned so much about things. And sometimes it's the very simplest things. One of the, you know, we have in the sometimes the pantheon of stigma, it's like if you're having problems, then you need to go away to treatment. And it's like, okay, then what's that? Well, somebody will say, well, that's where you go away for 30 days, 60 days or whatever. And I'm going, okay, you have any idea what happens there? No. I said, well, I do. I was at one and it wasn't really that hot. But I got a lot out of it because the people I met. who were there at the
Appreciate it.
same time. I was also very fortunate. I live in the state in the United States that has the highest percentage of Native American population, 10% of the and that's a whole nother kettle of fish when you talk about substances and alcohol and things like that. There's poverty, and then there's reservation poverty. And it can be just a heartbreaking thing to go see. But I also met a lot of young men who had a lot to teach me. And a lot of the things that they taught me that are central to to their life and their culture really translate well. And sometimes the cultures can be very, very different, but at its basis. There is one, I don't recommend authors a lot, but I'll recommend one. And his name is Dr. Joseph M. Marshall III. And he's Lakota from the Rosebud Reservation. He was instrumental in starting the very first 4-year degree granting university on an Indian reservation in the United States.
Wow.
And he wrote, this first book he wrote was called The Lakota Way. And the Lakota are one of the 7 tribes that were in this area. They call it the 7 Council Fires, or the Ocheti Sakowin. And the Lakota Way talks about their origin stories, kind of who they are and why, and what do they value, and what do they look at, and how do they interact with each other. And it's fascinating. And it's also, it can be extremely distressing, because you can see when that was taken away from them, the basis of this culture and how they approached the day and their relationships and everything. And it was replaced by this hustle bustle, make all you can, we got winners, we got losers. It's very, I encourage anybody to look him up, and he has written many, many books since then about that. But it's one of many philosophies that maybe got it a little more right than maybe the culture I was in got right away, that I did come to it. But I was talking about the treatment situation, and some people need that. Some people thrive in it. Some people thrive in all kinds of different things. What I'm finding out with coaching is that there are people also who have tried everything, or they think they've tried everything, and nothing has worked. And the power of a peer, a mentor, somebody that has a shared experience for a lot of people can really make a difference. And, and it doesn't cost 35,000 American dollars a month to go have that happen. It's about connecting with somebody else who's been there and you can talk with. You can do so confidentially. I play cheerleader when I think people need it. They need to have somebody who's congratulating them when they've had their victories. There has to be somebody there that when they stumble and either lapse. I think there's a difference between lapse and relapse. A lapse is a kind of a one-time thing, and relapse is, a longer term things. But it's like, okay, the numbers tell us that the number of people who are going to relapse is, well, extremely high. It's to the point where, I don't know, different studies say different things, but 90%, 95%. So in my mind, it's going, okay, if it's going to happen to 9 out of 10, maybe it's part of this. Maybe it's part of the experience. And it's like, okay, so you made a mistake. Okay, what do we do? Number one, how do you feel the next day? Well, physically, you might feel bad. You might be disappointed in yourself. And I say, don't dwell on that. Maybe throw it in your back pocket, though. It might come in handy one day. But really what the keys are, what did I learn? And what do I do next? Awesome. What did I learn? How did this happen? What were the circumstances? And can I learn from that? And what do you do next? I guess I can say this here. The one thing you want to avoid are the fuckets. fuck it, I can't do this. You know, you got to avoid that, because that's throwing up your hands saying, I can't do this. And you give up. And you know what? We're all going to make mistakes. We're human beings. We're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect. It's, you know, what we would like to do is to not make the same mistakes over and over and over. If we learn something from them. I often say my job as a coach is to help you not make the same mistakes I did, so that you have plenty of time and space to make your own. You know, it will happen as you do it. But what I love about this is that, you know, there are people that aren't that far off. Their lives are definitely suffering, and it's causing problems in their life. But to get back on track may not be as difficult for some than it is for others, and that it can happen in a very cost-effective manner. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to, you know, the treatment industry in the United States, which does help some people, and some people it's just a crock. It is extremely expensive, and there are people who make a lot of money doing it. I can tell you, I'm not doing what I do because I can make a lot of money, but I do it because it matters. And you know, and sometimes that's what I tell people, that, you know, when they come in, men and women, and I've had them from age 18 to 85.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now that you're here, I'll let you in on a little something. Number one, if you didn't before, you now have a team, and I'm on it. And you have other people that are out there who really are cheering for you, whether you know it or not, that you have a team. Because we don't do this by ourselves. We do this through connection. Nice. You know, and we have to be patient, because sometimes these things, we will have moves forward, we will have moves backward, but it's, what do we do with that? What do we learn from that? And that, know that I care, it matters. The fact that you are here, you've already done one of the toughest things. And just to know that you matter to me, you getting better matters to me. Because when I was at my absolute worst spot, people appeared. I don't know who they are, where they came from, or where they went, but they were there when I needed them. And can I tell you a quick story about connection? It's always amazing who you do connect with, and it's not always who you think. When I was in a 30-day 12-step based program, and the 12-step works for a lot of people, and that's great. And I think there's things in it that are wonderful. I have some disagreements on certain things. One of which is that I'm not helpless. I play a pretty important role in this thing. You know, I have to participate.
Oh yeah.
But, and it's funny, the guy I connected with was 22 years old, shaved head, tattoos everywhere, black baggy, everything. Always was just darting around. His eyes were darting because he knew he had spent a lot of time on the street and had to look out for his back all the time he was there. Why I connected with him, I don't know. But I do know that we each did an important thing for each other, at least one important thing. The thing he did for me was slow the F down. Slow down. Because I had gone from going way too fast and having everything a jumble to way too fast about, I'm going to get better. And so I was, you know, I was more positive in my going fast. Oh yeah. But I'm still going fast. The problem was I was going too fast. And so he had carte blanche to call me on that whenever he thought I needed it. And I needed it a lot. What I did for him was, he had gone through his life and everybody had told him he was stupid and that he was never going to amount to anything. And if he had any dreams, to forget about it, because he just wasn't bright enough. And unfortunately, the person that told him that the most was his father. And which was very unfortunate. I was lucky. I'm really lucky. I had wonderful parents. Still have my mom. She's 89 and just as much of a knucklehead as I am. And but I said, I've been around. I've seen a lot of things. I know smart people when I see them. And I say, you're plenty smart to do whatever it is you want to do. You know, there's a lot of other things that go into doing what you want to do, but don't let anybody tell you that you aren't smart enough to do it. You are smart enough to do whatever it is that you want to do. So if people are telling you that, they're wrong. I only saw him one time after we were out of treatment. We met about 6 months later, and had a meal together. And I haven't seen him since, but I think about him every day, every single day. I think about him and what he reinforced with me. Slow down. Take it easy. Don't be so hard on yourself. You know, this isn't a race. You know, it's like when we're young, we think, you know, when we're like 20, we think we got it all figured out. We have the answer to all the world's problems. And if people were just a little smarter, they could grab them. The older I get, the fewer things I know to be certain. And I'm down to 3 things that I know to be certain. Number one, people really dislike change. Even though it's important and even though it's inevitable, they don't like it. Number 2, insurance companies never like to spend money. And number 3, it's never too cold for ice cream. Those are the 3 things that I know to be certain. After that, it gets a little gray, and that's okay. That's okay. I don't need to be 100% certain on things. I don't have to be perfect. I try to be a little better every day. And if I have a day where I go backwards, I try not to make it 2. You know, I try to turn it around. I try to think, okay, go back to the basics. What am I doing here? You know, and perspective is a marvelous thing. A bad day today ain't nothing like a bad day when I was 40. I'm 62 now. You know, when I have a bad day, I had bad days in there. My day this day, well, I've had better ones, but you know what?
Yeah.
I'll make it. I'll be okay here.
Very true. Oh,
I talk about this stuff forever. You know, you get me wound up here. I can do it.
There's the passion. There's the passion that I want to see, man. No,
Oh,
that's cool.
yeah. It's well, and that's the cool thing is that it's doable. It's all doable. But it takes some changes. It takes some changes.
It takes action. It takes insight. It takes intentional living, and that's what is so beautiful today. Today we have got those insights, and hopefully many others out there will come onto that journey. That's why the 2 of us are standing here and sitting here and trying to be transparent and to be honest and just say it as it is, because there is hope, and people have got the power to change regardless.
Exactly.
The past does not equal the future. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, if people really like what you say and want to connect with you, where can they find you?
At wefaceittogether.org. wefaceittogether.org. And what we do is I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is just about smack dab in the middle of North America. And there's a lot of my people that I see in person. There's also people I see via Zoom, like we're doing now. We got very good at coaching during COVID. We had to, because there was a higher demand for services, and you couldn't go anywhere, which is, and it's really one of the great dichotomies is, you know, some people are telling me I need to quit isolating and go out and meet people. Oh, no, yeah, by the way, don't go anywhere and isolate yourself. So, and we've talked with people and coached people from 48 of the 50 states, 3 provinces in Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. Believe it or not.
There you go.
So if you just go to wefaceittogether.org, it'll tell you everything about what we do and kind of where we're at. And it's just a very simple thing to get started. One of our people, we call it our first impressions people. We'll call back. And we have people from all over the world who do it. And our hope is that, and I know we're not alone in that, you know, peer coaching is starting to pick up steam. When we may be a little ahead of the curve, but you know, helping people who have shared experiences.
Absolutely.
It's not brain surgery. It's you it's something that's very doable. But
Mm.
we can go to the website, look around, kind of get an idea of the philosophy. And we'd be happy to help you. We'd be happy to steer you to resources
Brilliant.
in your neck of the woods that might be available to you.
Brilliant.
And just know that if things haven't worked in the past, you may not have tried everything. So
Beautifully
take a
said.
chance.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Tlustos, what a man, what a force of nature. Love to talk to you. We could talk for hours here. Honestly, I love it because we both shared so much of the darkness, and we both now share the light, and it's beautiful. So, guys, what stops you? Why not come along on this journey? You have already taken action. You have listened to this show. That is already tells me that you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that you're ready to make change. Well, here you are. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the journey. Welcome to this path. It is amazing, and you have no idea what awaits you. But I tell you what, it is very likely to be so different, and probably so much better than probably the shit that you have gone through so far. So, Joe, thank you so much for coming onto my show. You're an amazing man.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. Absolutely.
That's cool. And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with passion. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.